Welcome to Wellthy Living Conversations. I'm Lisa, your host and founder of Wellthy Living. I'm here to connect with a variety of people to have inspiring and insightful conversations to help you live a meaningful, connected and well life, both personally and professionally. So my guest today is a doctor of traditional Chinese medicine, Jimi Wollumbin. I'll get him to say that when he comes on because I think I mucked that up even though I just asked him. But in addition to Jimi's esteemed bio, which I'll read in a second, I've been following Jimi's social media posts for most of this year, and the value and the wisdom that he shares about whole person well-being has really inspired me to invite him onto the show and to have a conversation about the world of medicine and about the different lenses that different people wear, and then the impact that that has on us and on others and on the world around us. So welcome, Jimi.
Hi, it's a pleasure to be here, Lisa, and it's Wollumbin.
Wollumbin, I knew I said I'd get that right. I just got it wrong, but you know, that's the reality of real.
No problem at all. No problem at all.
I'm sorry, I could edit it out, but I probably won't.
Not necessary.
No, so I'll just give everybody a formal introduction of you before we get into some of the more juicy parts of the conversation that we can have today. So Jimi's, as I said, a doctor of Chinese medicine, and he's not only an expert in his field, he's also knows how to teach others. So he's spoken at United Nations, open for Deepak Chopra. He teaches integrative doctors across America, sits on the faculty of American Integrative Health and Medicine Association, and is a lifetime member of the Tibetan Medical Institute's Friends of Tibetan Medicine. So after completing his internship at Chinese medicine in Beijing Hospital, he has since completed 3 research exchanges at Ayurvedic hospitals in India in 2019. He went on a trip through Siberia to research shamanic medicine as well. Jimi is the CEO and founder of One Health Organisation, a wellness-based charity, and has distributed over 10 metric tons of herbs and supplements to 100 locations across 13 countries since 2005. So Jimi, your bio just speaks volumes about your experience in the field of integrative medicine. I'm wondering maybe if we can start by you just telling us briefly, what led you to this field of study? Was it an intuitive calling? Did you have a particular experience in your life? It's not generally a profession that people just know they want to do unless there's something that has called them to that. So can you just chat a little bit about that?
Yes. I think it's pain, suffering, insecurity and sensitivity that really sort of ushered me along the way towards the medicine path. And it's my own deep sensitivity as a child, my own wounds, my own desire to live a life that was full of magic and meaning and to feel connected, you know. And so I'm a wounded healer. I was such a sensitive little boy, and life was tough through my childhood. Not because I was born into a slum, but just because I was a sensitive little being. So I think what pointed me on this path is just trying to be able to live in the world, right? And so I encounter a lot of people that are really having difficulty living in the world, and I can really relate to that because the world is a strange and crazy place. And so I think that's the best answer that I could give you rather than some other thing. It's the most honest, and I'd like to keep it real here.
Yeah, absolutely. Real is always best. So let's jump in and talk a little bit about sort of some of the current issues without being, I suppose, too specific all the time about what's going on right now in the world with the pandemic and everything else. Let's just talk about one of the major phrases that has come out of what's going on in the world at the moment. And that is that the phrase, follow the science. And you being someone who comes from an integrated place with medicine, I feel like you might have a lot to say about that. So, you know, it's this familiar phrase, and I'm wondering your perspective and how it's become a story or a playbook that's used to drive a certain narrative, or even in a way to create a culture.
Yes. Okay, great. Yes, there's a lot that we could speak about in here. And so it's a really deep-rooted subject. And so I think where to begin is let's just have a look at our terms there. We've got science, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so most of us assume we know what that means, but when you scratch the surface, it starts to get pretty blurry. It comes from the Latin sciente, meaning knowledge, right? So follow the knowledge. Okay, so is the Aboriginal invention of the boomerang and the hydrofoil around that's the precursor of the aeroplane, is that science? When they tested it and said, maybe we'll make it a bit bendier, and maybe we'll make it a little bit bendier, maybe we'll curve that. No, it didn't work. Is that science? In my book, that's science.
Yeah,
right? Science is not something that started in the 1500s in England or 16th century, and it didn't start 5th century BC Greece with the pre-Socratic philosophers either. It's a global phenomena of knowledge, sciente, of knowledge, right? Having said that, we've got this institution now that has that calls itself science, that has enshrined some of the principles of experimentation, of fallibility, of like, we don't know if we're right. In fact, we never know we're right. We just keep trying to prove things wrong. Mm-hmm. A deep curiosity that says, it doesn't matter what we've thought in the past. It doesn't matter if you're an expert. Let's us figure out, if you've got an idea, how to test it and to see if it's right. And then if we test it, then we still don't know it's right. We still know, we just know we haven't proven it wrong yet.
Yeah.
So it's a deep questioning, and there's a deep curiosity and a deep desire, for knowledge, for gnosis, for inquiry at the heart of good science, whether that is whichever culture that took place in, and whether it's an empirical science about how to throw boulders over a mountain, or a psychological science in terms of self-inquiry in the Himalayas, right? So to me, follow the science is, on the one hand, I could say, yes, follow the knowledge, because knowledge and empirical knowledge, it's everywhere, it's all over the place. However, the way in which it's being used at present is, don't question the experts. Don't rock the apple cart in terms of the status quo. Now, the deep irony and ridiculous of that is that all of our scientific saints, Copernicus and Galileo and Darwin, they did anything but follow the science of their time. They were revolutionaries, because science is not about following. It's not about following. It's not about authority, right? It's about inquiry, and it should have humility at the heart of it, and curiosity of just like, wow, we've got this little brain. Who knows whether it can understand the 26 dimensions of the cosmos we think we exist inside. But let's go forth humbly, and with the wonder of a child, of like, wow, how would we figure that out? So I'm deeply alarmed, despite my love of the scientific method, despite my love of the fruits of science that have returned to us visions of the cosmos that are just breathtakingly beautiful through electron microscopes and astronomical equipment. Despite all of that, I'm really alarmed by the cult of scientism that has emerged, not the scientific method. And in the same way that a Christian could say, listen, I'm down with love thy neighbor and do unto others, but the Catholic Church has gone off somewhere else, and I don't think they're the same thing anymore. Those core principles of love thy neighbor and do unto others, etc., are not consistently being modeled and held by the church that says it is. And so the core spirit of science, to me, is worthy of the respect that so many people grant it, right? However, the culture that has emerged around that is increasingly not curious, open-minded, humble, and it is increasingly an appeal to authority and a very narrow definition of inquiry and proof. So I think we've got to be very careful about that. The follow the science thing, it sounds okay, but it leads to somewhere like communism and all these other cultish kind of things that they go somewhere not good. Witch hunts is basically people soon enough who are deemed not to be following the science, a part of the party, in the communism, in the whatever the thing is, right? They're the Jews, the something. There's always an outsider, a heretic. Once you do that thing with authority, there's always heretics, and those heretics then have to be professionally, figuratively, or literally burnt at the stake. So I've got big problems with follow the science, despite loving science and the history of science and the philosophy of science.
Wow, what an incredible response. There is so much in that response that I'm actually thinking which direction to go because there is so much in there. And I just love how you really came back to the words that really stuck out for me were wonder and curiosity, and how far we've come away from wonder and curiosity. And wonder and curiosity are really, I suppose, in so many ways, words that you hear in the world of art. You hear about wonder in the world of art, but you don't often hear about wonder in the world of science. When you think about science, you think about, hard facts and knowledge. And even though we all know, based on what you just shared, that science isn't about facts, science is about acquiring knowledge and then being really curious and questioning the knowledge and then finding new knowledge and questioning that and finding new, etc., on and on. But with this hard statement of follow the science that we're seeing at the moment, there is that withdrawal of the critical thinking, the withdrawal of the curiosity, and the withdrawal of that sense of wonder, and definitely the humility that you said. So how do we bring back some of that, I suppose, art piece into science or into medicine? So we've got sort of that way that people view science, but that beautiful art form of, like even the example you gave around the boomerang was telling this delightful story. So how do we bring and marry that art and science together for medicine?
Well, I think to me, the split that we have there between art and science, in another way we could phrase this is between reason and reverence, right? Or between science and religion. There's a whole bunch of ways in which these splits are lined up, right? And it goes, and we have these splits in every area of our thinking at present. There's facts and there's myths. There's masculine and there's feminine. There's left wing and there's right wing. There's communist and there's capitalist. There's the environment and there's the economy, right? And so whatever subject you're talking about at present inside our current culture that is so incredibly polarized, then you're always going to have, like, as soon as you get to a point of depth, then the subject is going to be like, how do we resolve these seemingly irreconcilable polar opposites, right? And so you're saying that about science and art, right? But we could just be doing that inside a gender studies discussion of how do we reconcile the masculine modes of seeing and being in the world and feminine modes of seeing and being in the world. How do we talk about that? Or we could do it inside economy and ecology. We could do it inside all the humanities and the sciences. How do we reconcile these splits at so often? Politically, the left wing or the right wing, it seems to be getting further and further apart, right? And so as soon as we understand the macro question there, before diving into the specific question you posed, I want to say that at present, if you're wearing your glasses at present and they were like bifocal glasses or they had a crack in them, then every subject that you would look at would be split in two. Every subject. And so you're going to look at the practice of medicine and it's going to be like, oh, well, there's the sciencey part and there's the art part, and you're going to look at it through a cracked lens that divides everything in two. And so when it comes to medicine, Then we say, oh, how do we put the reason and reverence back together? How do we get science and art back together? And that's the question that you're asking. And I'm saying they were never apart. Like matter and energy, or time and space, they appeared through our cracked lens to be different. Body and soul, the mind and the body. Fill in the blanks for all these examples of things that look like they're two things. Magnetism and electricity, they're one thing underneath there. So how do we put them back together? First, we remember that those splits are splits in our lens, in our narrative, in the way in which we are seeing the world. And in traditional medicine, that split between art and science did not exist in the same way that it does today. The split between reason and reverence did not exist. The split between the left brain and the right brain did not necessarily exist in all cultures for all times, most certainly, right? And now that split, let's say the split between the left brain and the right brain, to keep mixing our metaphors and to keep it simple, that split infects the way in which we do everything in modernity. We could say in the West, but it's no longer in the West. In modernity, everything is split, everything is fractured. And so medicine itself is fractured. And science is just one part. When we say science, which means knowledge, obviously it's not the fullness of knowledge, because, well, it leaves apart all these other forms, like the science of resolving conflict inside a marriage, or the science of wisdom. All of those things. When we say science, we're talking about a very small strip of knowledge that we can look at. It's been split off and polarized into this one area. But actually that field is much vaster. So firstly, I want to say, before we can put things back together, we have to realize where the crack was. And the crack is in us, the way we see the world, our culture. And it's seeing there's us and there's them. There's the good guys and there's the bad guys. There's the victims and there's the perpetrator. There's the virus and there's humanity. There's nature and there's culture. There's reason and there's reverence. There's facts and there's myths. These are all two different things according to our cracked lens. And they're not. And that cracked lens is dividing the world. It's dividing the world and causing increasing polarization amongst all of us. And I've recently noticed that in my local communities through the process of COVID. You could see the fragmentation, not just at a political level, but coming down into relationships, marriages, families, workplaces, and friendships, right? But it's not a unique issue to any political or medical crisis like COVID. I think that polarization is because we've got a cracked lens. So how do we heal it in medicine? It's just like, well, it's deeper than medicine. It affects everything we do. How do we heal the polarization of our modern culture? How do we put science and art back together inside ourselves? How do we strengthen the corpus callosum, the bridge between the left brain and the right brain? How do we get that integration within ourselves? Because if we're not looking at back and seeing where the split is inside us and the way in which our culture sees medicine, science, and art as separate, then we're never going to be able to fix it if we don't know that fixing it comes back here, back to us.
Yeah. Whew. So yeah, I mean, it's so true what you say, and I've always said, and in everything that I put out, I always say that it often starts with self and connection to self, and even what you were saying, about how do we repair that split lens? To me, my mantra is connection is medicine. So it is about connection that heals, and it starts with that piece of connection to self. So if we're going to start and say, well, we have to bring it back in as the first step to heal that cracked lens, that's something that sounds really quite simple, but is not so simple for a lot of people, because a lot of people are extremely disconnected from themselves. They held beliefs that they don't even know are their own or not their own, or they're conditioned, or their families or their culture that has ingrained through their experiences. They hold...
That's all of us.
Yep,
that's you and me.
That's right.
That's all of us in some way, right?
Values, the same thing. Most people are disconnected from their actualized self. Like when you talked about your actualized self, when you talked about why you might have entered the field of integrative medicine, you made a comment about what you were like as a kid. And so I think that so many people are living such a busy, fast lifestyle. There's so much fear, there's so much anxiety, there's so much overwhelm. And you and I can both sit here and say, well, if you stopped and you paused and you spent the time and connected back to yourself and became grounded, then you would reduce all these overwhelm, all this anxiety, and then we'd be at a place where we could start to, I suppose, heal the fracture and heal that fractured lens. But that's great in conversation and talking about it. But it's still, most people still sit with a very ingrained narrative, and an ingrained narrative that has been, pushed inside of them from society and their own experiences and their family. And that's how they operate. So where do you go from there? How do you...
Okay, yes. So again, I want to repeat, it's not most people, it's you and I and everybody. We all have a narrative that has that socialization has put into us.
Yes.
And then we have narratives that we've reactively pushed back against in response to those. And some that we might feel like we've developed and chosen deeply, but we all have aspects. We're all creatures of our time and our culture as well. And some of those things are healthy and some of them are not so healthy. So I'd really like to make sure that I'm not setting myself up as, oh, well, before I used to see the world in a cracked and dysfunctional way, and now I've been on this magnificent healing journey, and I too can teach you how to be more whole and to heal your wounds and see the world in a better way. No, I'm not going to be one of those people that says that awful story. It's not true. I'm human and messy, and I've got broken lenses and strange ways of seeing the world. I'm reactive. I'm on my path like everybody else, And so firstly, I want to make sure that I'm talking inclusively about our collective dysfunction, which definitely includes Jimmy. I'm a part of the collective dysfunction. All right. So I really want to own that.
Yes. Right.
So that, I think that's quite important, because otherwise we're doing another one of those things of the us and the them.
Absolutely.
Us being the healed spiritual wisdom cult elite, and the them being the mass unwashed people who have not yet ascended to our heights.
Yes,
and that's just awful, right?
Agree.
So you can see there's a little us and them creeps in there.
Absolutely.
So then, how do we approach this? So I think another one of the polarities that I think is perhaps really helpful to introduce here is the polarity between fact and myth, right? Mm-hmm. So we've got this follow the science sort of thing, and at present we've had this like, listen, oh God, present over the last few years, we've had this thing of focus on the facts. You've got to focus on the facts. But then, and this happens in any field and any issue as well, but everybody got a little taste of it with COVID, is that then you say, yeah, well, you're just following the wrong facts. Whoever you are, whichever side of the great divide of COVID you fell upon, then you're looking over at other people say, I'm following the facts. It's like, no, you're not. You're following the myths. It's like, that's not a myth. I've got the facts. And so suddenly follow the science / follow the facts. It's obviously follow the experts and follow the status quo of the experts, which is the most unscientific narrative that we could ever sort of push forth anywhere. You get rid of all of those amazing saints if you have that as a culture at the center of the Church of Science. So facts and myths. Now, our culture, because the church at the center of our culture was in the West largely a Christian church, a cathedral, has been crumbled and torn down and all these sorts of things. And at the center, the highest building at the center of every village and city now is no longer a Catholic church, but it is an economic institution, which also will have, rather than a cross on top of it, some sort of marking of science. So science now functions like a religion for our culture, because it tells us who we are and where we come from and what's the nature of the world, right? We all have these things inside us, even though we might not identify with it.
Yep.
It's informed us at an unconscious level about how we see the world, the origin of the world, and all of these things, because it's our dominant narrative, right?
Yeah, it's our personal narrative.
Yes, we can have all these other ones on top of it, but but it's impossible to think without scientific narratives today, because we've all been taught inside them. Yep. We all think in terms of, that are deeply informed by that. And same as we all used to think in terms that were deeply informed by Christianity in Europe traditionally. And so when we've got this question of facts and myths, I think we've got through this, the Church of Science, we've really lifted up our emphasis, because Christianity, we felt like, was focused only on parables and narratives and metaphors that were being misinterpreted and were not true and were being taken literally, like the earth was created in 6 days, complete with a fossil record. Then in response to that, then we just said, come on. And we got real focused on the other side of the equation. Myths out, myths bad, facts in, facts good, right? So historically we did something like that, and we're still now on the facts. Mm. However, the thing about facts is that facts are by themselves, like in a scientific paper, a fact that this enzyme did this when we introduced this chemical to it. That's a fact, right? Like when it was studied, and it can be repeated by a few people, but it's all by itself, it is meaningless. Mm. It's just written like that. Enzyme X did this, and and so in order for it to have any meaning, it has to be inserted into a narrative. And so our awareness of the narratives in which facts are constellated by scientists, by scientists themselves, the value sets, the narratives, the mythic structures that scientists live by, that we all live by, and that determines which facts we want to grab. And we grab the facts to generally support our mythic narrative that was there already, right? And so for some people, they're grabbing scientific facts to support a mythic narrative that is in line with the current culture of science. For some people, they're grabbing facts that are supporting a alternative view of science, or an unscientific view. They're grabbing the facts that support creationism, right? Or some other sorts of things.
So what I'm saying is that it's that bias. It's the unconscious, bias that we all use. Like you can always it's like in anything in life, you can always justify anything. That we live by, like we've forgotten. We've been talking about follow the facts. We've got a culture that's focused on facts, right? And we feel like these facts are just solid. It's just solid. You don't have to question it because it's a fact. But what we forget is that those facts all go inside this weird sort of amorphous constellation of a story, of values, right? Of these mythic kind of stories about what the world is, all these assumptions. And science is full of them, like the laws of nature are the same today as they were yesterday. But that's a scientific assumption, right? But it's definitely not the case. And it's potentially not true. Like the speed of light it appears to be changing, I think, over the decades that go, and the power of gravity and all these other things. So if those things are changing, it's like, we can't even assume that the laws of nature are constant, right? But we do. We have to make those assumptions. So we've got all these assumptions that we don't look at, right? That the world is a chaotic place, that there is no God, that there is a God, that human beings are special, that human beings are good, that human beings are bad, that life is meaningless, that we come here for purpose, that there is such thing as something subjective and something objective. These are all stories, and some of them are wonderful stories. I live by some of them, but we have to remember that those are the unexamined stories through which we cherry pick facts
Whether we're a biochemist, a physicist, a conspiracy theorist, a lovely mum, or a herbalist. We're all looking at facts, and when we find facts as a biochemist or a herbalist that don't fit with our worldview, we kind of just push them to one side. All of us, yes. Jimmy included. That's the biased part, right? Why are we biased? Why do we push some facts to one side? Because they don't fit with our mythic narrative, right? They don't fit. We're just like, oh, don't fit. That doesn't feel right. Because to me, the world is a beautiful place, or to me, So we just look, that fact just goes aside. But we have to remember that it's myths, unexamined, unconscious often, value-laden narrative structures that determine which facts we are open to even picking up. And so then those things sit together as a one thing, not two things. Facts and myths, they're interwoven. Again, there's not two things there.
Yeah. And I suppose, I mean, there's so much in what you said, but I suppose, you talked about before the duality and how things aren't one or the other, things are both. And I think in the same vein, cherry picking information isn't necessarily good or bad either in some ways, because if somebody, and when we all cherry pick information that supports our own narrative, and then that keeps us feeling calmer, less overwhelmed, less anxious, then the ripple effect of that in our relationships, in our, the way that we move in the world, and our own impact on our own disease or dis-ease and state of being, then that can be a really positive thing. However,
absolutely,
if we don't do that, if we only do that, it can create divisiveness and segregation and one-upness and, buying into that whole patriarchal system and, I'm better, you're worse, and the judgment that goes along with it. So I think for me, it's not about the fact of believing facts to be true or not, and whether that even matters if people cherry pick it. I think the important part is the ability to agree, to disagree, and not cause friction and judgment and segregation because two different people believe and look through two different lenses.
Yes, I think beautiful. I agree wholeheartedly. Is that there is there's an inevitability. We all must have a narrative structure in which to support us and to guide us through life, a myth to live by. We all have myths that we live by, right? Mm-hmm. Examined or unexamined, but we all live by myths. And those myths are then enforced and renovated and expanded by facts and experiences as they go along. So we require them. You can't live without it. You can either hold them gently and playfully and with self-awareness. These are the myths that I live by. Or you can hold them literally and dogmatically and unconsciously and say, I don't have any myths that I live by. And you can just keep selecting your facts according to a bias like that. But we all must have them. So the absence of them is not on the table. And they do wonderful things for us when we hold them lightly, with the openness towards constantly writing them and expanding them and renovating them.
Well, it takes me back to what you originally said in the very first part of the conversation, and that was about the need for wonder and curiosity and humility. And I suppose that, marrying that bit up with what we've just said is that it's okay to believe what you believe, but it's the ability to stay humble and the ability to still have some openness to inquiry.
Yes, absolutely. Because what we're passionate about is truth, is experience, is something whatever name we want to give that to, like truth or God, or self-experience or consciousness. There's a whole range of different things we can say. This is why I'm doing inquiry. This is why I'm doing science, or why I'm asking questions and staying open for some large, huge, beautiful value. That's the thing that we all want. And if we remember that that's what we're after, then we never know who disagreeing with us has despite them being obviously a stupid asshole because they disagree with us. But perhaps that stupid asshole still has a piece of the puzzle that's going to help me get towards truth, reason, God, soul, whatever the meta value is that I'm striving towards. Yeah. And so if we remember that what I'm going towards is healing, what I'm going towards is truth, what I'm going towards is balance, fill in the blank, then it helps us to stay open to the gypsies and barbers and butchers and who are the guys that carry the coffins out? Anyway,
yep.
All of those untouchable, strange folk that Paracelsus said he learnt more from than he learnt from doctors and scientists, right? And so we've got to stay open to all the people that disagree with us, all the people that are on the other political spectrum, all the people that live with a different myth. And you say, listen, in my myth, matter is just an illusion and it's all a dream. And the person you're speaking to says, in my myth, it's all in the earth. Matter is, it's like an indigenous thing. Matter is the womb of soul. It's all in matter, and soul emerges out of that. And so that conversation, both of those people are going to get closer to God, truth, meaning, connection, soul, if their story can encompass and it grows from being cross-fertilized by this story that feels opposite. It's all a dream, it's all matter. And then you're like, but what's the it's all? And your sense of the it's all gets a little bit bigger as you're wrestling with disagreement. And so we definitely are losing our ability to disagree with each other, right? We have been over the last few years to disagree with each other gracefully, with curiosity and humor and compassion, and humility. And what I witnessed over the last few years, as in 2020, 2021, was an erosion of that baseline, right? Of our ability to disagree. And as a species, as a community, as a marriage, as a family, our ability to be able to integrate different perspectives is crucial for our survival, because someone else is seeing something that you're not. And a bunch of the time they're accurately perceiving, the elephant in the room that the blind men have all got their hands on in that parable. And one of them's got the blind man's got his hand on the elephant's tail, and is saying that the creature in front of us is like a paintbrush. It's long and thin and hairy. And the next one has got his hands on the side of the elephant and says, rubbish, the creature in front of us is like a wall. And the next one has got hands on the elephant's ear. It's like, no, it's like a stingray. It's a parchment. It's a strange creature, Which one's wrong? We're all that blind man with a little corner, or blind woman with a little corner of the same elephant. And that elephant is healing, is soul, is truth, is the cosmos at large. So we need to have, rather than abuse the blind man next to us that's saying it's like a parchment, or the blind woman behind that's saying it's like a paintbrush, we need to be able to have an openness that enables us to say, why do you say it's like a paintbrush? Because it's clearly wide and flat like a wall. And in that moment, if we phrase it well, rather than you're a moron, it's not a paintbrush at all, then that we might be open to hearing, well, it fits all within my hand, from one end to the bit. It's so small, it's about the same size. And then you're like, hang on, that's not what I'm feeling. And then your sense of the elephant gets more complex and nuanced, right? Your sense of the elephant gets more complex and nuanced, because we've all just got a little corner of the elephant, of the elephant of healing, the elephant of science, the elephant of community, the elephant of whatever the cosmos. Yeah. We've got our hands on a little corner of it.
Yeah, I mean, and I suppose when it comes to our ability to communicate with grace and curiosity. It's simply, I suppose, a tool that people could use is simply that if you have a reaction within your body to react with judgment to what somebody said, that's a natural reaction often when people disagree with, when you disagree with what someone says. I mean, it's not a bad thing to feel judgment. We all feel judgment. It's just about the ability, I suppose, to pause and train yourself that when you feel like you disagree with something someone's saying, that instead of judging it, you assume that you don't have all the pieces of the puzzle, or that you don't quite understand what they're saying. So instead you might go, oh, that sounds interesting. How about you tell me a bit more? Or can you explain that in a different way? Because I don't think I'm quite understanding, because the way that I'm understanding it doesn't make any sense to me.
Yes, perfect. And one of the beautiful gifts, if you can do that for somebody else in that moment, the amazing thing is that the side effect of that is that those arguments, those disagreements, those polarizations don't just exist out there in the relationships that you have with other beings. They exist deep in your own heart. When you look at the ice cream in the freezer, a part of you says, eat the ice cream. And another part of you says, don't eat the ice cream, don't eat the ice cream, don't eat the ice cream. When you wake up on Monday, a part of you just says, no, I hate my job. I don't want to work, not today, I want another day of the weekend. And another part's like, oh no, I'm looking forward to getting in there and doing this thing. It's like, should I sleep with my wife's sister or not? A part is like, yes, she's hot. Another part saying, no, that's a good idea, Jimmy. I'm in conflict. We're all in conflict. We're constantly in conflict. We're constantly in conflict. And if we can hold that conflict compassionately with others, right? Let's start there, where we just say, well, okay, let's hear what you've got to say, and let's have a little dance around this, Then next time when a part of you, when you're in conflict with yourself, which is every single day at different moments, right? When, you've got the, however you want to see that conflict, I just want to be all wrapped up at home under a doona by myself, and I don't want to see anyone. There's a part that always feels like that. There's always some part that's just like, I just want to be all by myself or with one little cuddly bunny friend. And then there's another part that's just like, let's go and have fun, How do you reconcile the extroverted side of you, right? We all have an extroverted side and an introverted side. We all have a part of our consciousness that faces out into the social world, into the natural world, and a part of our soul that focuses inside. What do we do with those conflicting parts of ourselves, right?
Yes.
So when we're, just to tie the threads in, right? So what we're talking about is how to do this in, like we're saying, this is necessary out in the world, right? To learn again how to engage with conflict and apparent polarity, where we disagree with each other and other people about things. And we've been doing that poorly lately, because we've got a right and wrong, us and them, true and false, kind of mentality about all those things. Thesis and antithesis. And we've forgotten that in addition to the thesis and its antithesis, there is a beautiful place of shades of grey, which is the synthesis, right? The synthesis between spirit and body, the synthesis between reason and reverence, the synthesis between science and art, right? And that's the place that we get the middle ground, the golden middle, the sacred middle that we're so desperately in need of in the world today, that keeps getting eroded and becomes a trench line instead, with everyone lining up on one side of the other of a series of polarized issues.
Absolutely.
Right? So we see that there's a continuity there between our own that polarization is not just a lens that we're looking through, it exists inside our own heart, right? We have those images of like a devil on one shoulder and an angel on another from the Christian kind of thing, but we could have the yin and yang symbol. You can see all sorts of different ways. We're masculine and feminine inside us, right? Each one of us. So how do that part of us is Mars and a part of us is Venus. How do we how do we reconcile that so that it's a beautiful and harmonious relationship? And if we can't do that, and if we can't gift ourselves a compassionate kind of dialogue, logos, two-way conversation, and we just end up with one part of us in a monologue, right, of just like, this is the way it is, then parts of us get discarded and they don't get any time at the mic. They don't get to say the aspects of the life that they want. You lead a one-sided life until at some point it falls over because these parts have undermined and betrayed and betrayed you, because they're like, I need some time to party, or I need some time by myself. I need some introvert, whatever the thing is. So there's a continuity between your own personal healing and, of course, the healing of the world at large. And when we engage in helping to resolve polarity with our, with the person, negative polarity rather than a yummy sexual polarity, negative polarity with someone who disagrees with us economically or politically or religiously, right? When we do that well in a way that is compassionate, with curiosity and wonder and respect, right? Then those qualities of curiosity and wonder and respect, we've got them then, and we can bring them when a part of us is disagreeing with another, when that schism comes down in our own heart, right?
Yeah.
I want a divorce. I don't want a divorce. Part of me wants to leave and wants to be by myself in a combi van, and a part of me freedom and security, another polarity, right? Freedom and security. What do we do with that? Irreconcilable poles.
Yeah.
So you can see that continuity that I'm talking about healing, which is a word that means whole making, which brings together apparent opposites.
Yeah, absolutely. Whoa. So yeah, I mean, the book that there's a book that I read a number of years ago. Unfortunately, the author passed away also a number of years ago, which was The Dark Side of the Light Chaser by Debbie Ford. And that was the book that was this real mind-opening place for me, where she really, I suppose it's a book about your shadow. And so it's really looked at that idea that when you judge somebody else for something, it's a part of your disowned self. And so I suppose that plays to the concept that you're talking about now, as well as that inside we've got this inner conflict, and yet so much of the stuff within ourselves is disowned, that we're then the good and the bad that then appears within another person. And if we can stay open to that concept, then it allows us to, I suppose, connect rather than disconnect with people that hold different positions or perspectives than our own.
Absolutely. So that good and bad, or good and evil, and right and wrong are fundamental poles that we consider to exist in the world, like up and down, rather than relative relationships, in this particular moment. Is the absence of rain good, or the absence of rain bad? Well, depends where you live right now, right?
Exactly.
Obviously. But because we've got these polar building blocks that we say everything must be one or the other in this regard, rather than a yin yang symbol of context and relationship and process, then absolutely we polarize things out, where we've got that which we consider light and good, and that which we consider dark and bad. Dark, shadowy, black, unconscious. Those things have become demonized, right? Even the word demon has been demonized. It's daemon, and it means something like a nature spirit. The daemons of everything. The Christians demonized the concept of daemon. It was like an angel that existed in the world, in nature around us, right? So even the demons, and they were just like Pan, that Pan became the devil, but he wasn't a devil. He was just a half he's an animal, a god of nature. Of course, he's a bit hairy and smells like a goat.
I love your ancient wisdom, mythical examples.
Well, that's where we have to go if we want integrated examples.
Yes.
To remind us that that we are those composite things. We are part devil, part angel. We are part beast. We are part human. We are of the earth and of the stars.
Yes.
And our shadows, bless our shadows. Bless the nighttime. Thank God it's not daylight all the time.
Yeah.
Bless the darkness. Bless the unseen. Thank God for the envelope of darkness that comes and holds us at night. Thank God for that we can't see all things and we have unknowing. What a terrible curse it would be to know everything, and everything was light and revealed before us. Yeah. Thank God, thank Goddess, thank the gods, old and new, thank them all for the darkness and for the unconscious.
Absolutely.
Otherwise, the perfect order, the perfect consciousness, the perfect knowledge of, in 17 years from today on Wednesday at 11:45, I will be having beans on toast for lunch in the refact. Only in prison do you have that kind of perfect knowledge, right? Prison. 17 years from now, what are you having for lunch on a Wednesday? It's where you'll be. That's prison. So unconsciousness, darkness, the shadows. We need to sing these things back up again, because otherwise, if we don't hold them and honor them, then, as happens in a range of new agey kind of environments, then there's a demonization of the unconscious. Whereas in Jungian sense, the unconscious is godlike. It's what's guiding us. It's the great ocean of being. It's not a bad thing. But if you walk around at a new age festival, unconscious is used like a stick. Oh, she's very unconscious. Oh, he's very unconscious.
Yeah.
It's like, those are, which one are they? Insults and compliments?
Yeah.
It's like light and dark, and then you get this weird pushing towards the rainbow, and then an overt rainbow out the front of like, here's all my light, and then the shadows breeding in an unheld, strange, icky place underneath the stairwell of your consciousness, and then it leaks out in ways that aren't appropriate or healthy. So I'm proud of my shadows, the ones that I can see and the ones that I'm coming towards. All the ones that I can't, I'm welcoming of them. So here's some more language about how we can go outside of the right and wrong, truth and lies, us and them, good and evil, all of those fractures that come through that then cause whatever subject we're talking about to get a trench line in between it that is irresolvable. And COVID is just a late example of that. We could talk about communism and capitalism, or left-wing politics and right-wing politics, or the left hemisphere of the brain and the right hemisphere of the brain.
So what I want to then talk about is bringing it back to, I suppose, medicine and healing, and two industries, I suppose, that ideally would not be on different poles, but would be integrated, and how we've got to that. So I want to talk a little bit about the wellness industry, because so often everything outside of Western medicine or Western traditional medicine is often seen and bunched together under the whole wellness industry banner. And this wouldn't be such a bad thing if the integrated whole person principles that you kind of just talk of wellness were maintained. However, the wellness industry has, to me, become like the sickness industry, and it's become like a multi-million-dollar industry, and has almost become like a virus onto itself and infected its true essence of where it really where its principles lie. So in some ways, it's really sad that it's become just another buzzword, and the ideal wellness lifestyle is being replaced by, disconnected people going from one wellness fad to another. And to me, this, degrades the true meaning of integrated wellness paradigm, and creates, like you talk about, this great separation, like within the medical models. So we've got like two different medical models as opposed to an integrated one. So I know you, like myself, like this integrated approach. one where there's collaboration rather than competition. But how hard is that to achieve? And have we become so disconnected from our whole being that the road to true integrated healing feels so distant and difficult for most?
It is, yes, great subject matter. So this split between orthodox and alternative medicine, right? I was like, oh, we don't do that because that's alternative, or we don't do that because that's orthodox. Not only do we not do that, but we don't believe that, and we don't inquire into that, we don't support it, we don't condone it, we don't, both ways. And the dogma can be just as thick on either side of that divide, right? Just as thick in the camp that I am generally placed in, which is the alternative camp. I don't want to be placed there. In the same way that I don't want to be placed on the left wing anymore. It's like, no, don't place me on the left wing. Don't place me on the right wing. Obviously, that makes no sense. I don't like those wings. I'm looking for a sensible center here, right? Yes, we need both wings to fly, right? We need both wings to fly. And so in terms of that medical split, of course we have a split in medicine, right? Of course we have a split in medicine. Medicine, which is about healing and whole making, itself has an autoimmune disease and is ripped asunder, so that there's this warring between people that are in the healing profession. And in some ways you could say, well, 'twas ever thus. But I'm not sure it was 'twas ever thus. I'm not sure that they had the same kind of factions around dogmas on this continent in Australia 60,000 years ago, 70,000 years ago, 80,000 years ago. I think the way in which we've got these poles around these ideologies is a relatively recent phenomena, as in, let's just talk about the last 3,000 to 5,000 years or something. It's not human nature, I want to say. So then what do we do with that split between those two cultures? I think on the one hand, it is, we're doing it now. We're having this discussion to say we have to be able to see the polarization and the split lens that splits everything like that again and again and again. And only when we do that can we then start to see, well, what I've thought of as wellness and well-being and alternative medicine as the good, and what I've thought of as the bad being the orthodoxy, the orthodox medicine, for example, I'm going to use that one because it could be the other way around, is another example of those splits, right? It's another us and them.
Yeah.
And that us and them is not a balance. And so that's why we, in the Greek tradition and in the Western traditional medicine, not modern Orthodox medicine, the traditional Hippocratic medicine of the West, and the good, I would say, in 5th century BC Greece, that's flowed over into Europe, was really not one or the other, but was a balance of powers, right? A balance of powers. And democracy arose upon this. The notion of the 4 elements arose upon this. Hippocratic medicine arose upon this. So politically and in every other thing, we say, if there's too much fire, then the water goes down, it's no good. If there's too much water, the fire goes down. If you've got too much power in this assembly and not enough power in that, what we need is a balance. And so the yin-yang symbol does not demonize yin or yang. It says you require a balance, right? And so in terms of the strengths and the ways of seeing the world that Orthodox medicine has, then inside medicine, we're looking for a balance between those models, those interventionist models that are practiced in a very particular way that can be miraculous and life-saving, and that are more easily definable and use a particular language. And then this other more amorphous language that exists often in traditional medicine and in well-being and in public health, which is about all the messy stuff of how we live and how we think and what our lifestyle is, and using messy medicines like herbal medicines that have hundreds of chemicals in them, not just one chemical, hundreds, and they mix together in funny different ways. How do we put these two approaches together and when and in what ways, so that we have a balance. And individuals and clients are often confounded as to how to do that as well, because then they just feel like, well, my chiropractor told me all surgery is bad, and my surgeon told me I'm not going to heal without surgery here. And so who's right and who's wrong?
Well, I think that in some ways, if we look at what we've actually said, they're both really, in so many ways, not healthy. Let's not say wrong or right. They're not healthy. Yes. Because they're both still coming from that one or the other approach. There's something's right.
Absolutely.
And wrong.
And the client doesn't have to choose between them. The client can have a little bit of A and a little bit of B. The client just, as a patient, you don't have to say, oh, either I'm, medically Muslim or medically Jewish here. You can just say, all right, I want to take a little bit of here and a little bit of there. I'm looking for balance in my body and in my life. And that's what I'm looking for.
That's the self-mastery piece, which we could actually do a whole another episode on. But yeah, I think that we have, as humans, in this modern world, self-mastery has gone a little bit to the wayside because there is so much information, and information is at the fingertips, and people just want to know, and they want to know with certainty, and they don't want to feel the uncertainty and this discomfort, and they just want the people to give them some sort of why this is happening, what to do about it, and some hope that it's all going to be okay. And they don't care, in the end, it doesn't really matter to them who gives them that answer. They just want that answer. And so, and in a way, that's not as well such a bad thing, because really what, the psyche of hope really is what heals in so much. So in the end, if we all embrace that none of it's really good or bad, but whatever narrative is being fed to us, if it's giving us some sort of hope, whether it's from a medical doctor or a Chinese medicine doctor or the chiropractor or whatever form of modality of medicine that person practices, that if it gives some sort of resolve, that gives a patient some sort of hope and some sort of empowerment, then I say it's all right.
Yes. And so in relation to healing, as I've said before, healing, the goal of medicine is whole making. That's what to heal means, is to make whole. It comes from the same etymological root. And so in that process of making whole, where we're bringing together all those little fractured parts, we're not wrong making some of them into truth or falsehood, and we're not focused upon those things. We're focused on things like, that's why narrative is good, because if we have an awareness that what we're taking is a narrative, we can hold it self-consciously, we can hold it lightly, we can hold it metaphorically and say, right now I feel like, the narrative of, that things, whatever, here's the narrative. This is a helpful narrative for me for now. And I'm just going to run with that until someone comes along and says, you know what, I was in your situation, and I found that when I just thought about it like this, it enabled me to come into a relationship with it in a healthier way. And it's like, oh, great, I've just revised my narrative, and that's now the next, what's helping me on my journey in my marriage, in my health. Previously, I was seeing this as viral. Now I'm looking at it in terms of my constitution, or Ayurvedic narratives have really helped me with my chronic fatigue. And they don't speak about chronic fatigue. They speak about wind and vata. And this new narrative has been really helpful for me. It doesn't make the first narrative wrong. It's just another lens through which to grab a hold of the elephant, the unknown that's there in the room, the unknown elephant in the room. So towards that goal of healing, then I think we definitely, in order to have whole making, we need ways in which we can come into relationship with things that appear to be at conflict with one another in ourselves and in the world, right? And the way in which we can do that is to hold our narratives loosely, not in a clenched fist, loosely.
Yeah.
Loosely, hold it as myths, in a beautiful sense of myth, not only false truths, I mean mythic narratives. And then if we can hold them gently, then when someone comes along and tells us this other thing, then it can get incorporated into it, hopefully. Because you're not saying this is true, you're saying this is the lens through which I've been looking at the world at in this way. This is the story that I've been telling myself. This is how I've been making sense of the world, the economy, the environment, and my marriage, right? Or my illness. And then you have the opportunity to just add another, like a work of art, add another facet onto it. Ah, yes. And it can get more complex and more contradictory and more beautiful, this arc of a narrative that is guiding you through your life. Absolutely. And I think regardless of the issue, that is a healthy way for us to start to move through our health at the individual level, medically and soulfully and psychologically, but also how, as a culture, as a global culture, to start to get along and to tackle all these complex issues that we have.
Absolutely. And I think that that is a great place to probably wind up, because it has really brought it all together. Because in order to do that, if we leave people with the idea that in order to do that, it comes full circle to the very first things that you said, and that was about needing humility and curiosity. And in order to stay open and be able to change our narrative, when we get, let's call it science, which is new knowledge, yes. We are able to heal ourselves more. So for me, I suppose if we end just on the idea that our inner power is our birthright, and we all hold that right to think one thing one day, think something else another day, and actually continuously mold and change and our own stories that we tell each other ourselves, because there is so much power in storytelling.
Yes, and not just one thing one day and one thing the next day, but in this exact moment to feel conflicted.
Yeah,
a part of me just really wants to sell everything to the poor and rock up and just try and make the world a better place. Another part of me just wants to run away and live in the forest in my little teepee, you know, like, and those parts, not one of them is wrong and other is right. How do I honor those different parts?
Absolutely.
Right? So again, I think I would like to bring it back to something that is inclusive and compassionate about contradiction. And it's not to resolve contradiction and to get rid of contradiction, but to find how to hold them harmoniously, to allow them to shift and twirl like the yin and yang, you know, that they've got their seasons and movements, and there's a polarity and a charge, and that charge between the tension of our, like me with my lover, you know, me with my wife, the polarity between that is what can give a sense of the absence of that polarity doesn't feel good. There's a positive polarity when contradiction is held lovingly, right? And so that can be the collaboration between the scientist and the priest. That can be reason and reverence. That can be masculine and feminine. That can be communism and capitalism, science and art, all of those things. But it comes back to us. And so the part that I would like to leave us with is that embrace your contradictions, sweet friends. Understand that they are there. Don't wage war upon the contradictions within your heart. Wage peace upon them. Acknowledge the contradictions. They don't need to be resolved. Just come into relationship with them with curiosity and wonder and awe and compassion.
Beautiful. I love it. Wow. So yeah, what a big conversation. And, you know, we definitely touched on many different things, and I really enjoyed your, you know, myths that you intertwined into the conversation, because it really gives it that depth and breadth and ability to really see things in the old and the new world way, and how there's an integration with that as well. So thank you so much for your time today. It's been
a pleasure.
Yeah, thanks. And I want to just give everybody, like, alert everyone to the fact that due to your own strength and courage and inner power and staying true to your own beliefs, you were presented with a challenge in your own business over the last sort of year. and you've had to move your services and provide and offer your services in a different way. So you've had to stay nimble and think outside the box. I won't like to use the word pivot because I hate that word now, but you know. Whoa.
But it was a pivot, yes.
It was a pivot.
And if anyone wants to follow me, then they can do so through looking for me on Patreon, which is where a whole bunch of my teaching. So I have an apprentice lounge and a wellness hub inside there. My inner circle exists on Patreon, and you can jump in for as little as $2.50 a week on that, right? So it's very affordable for everyone. Or you can get a larger, if you want to dive deeper and you want to get the deep stuff, then you can go in for a package that's more like $10 a week or something.
Yeah.
Otherwise, there's free content from me, that a little bit of free content that still comes through on Facebook, and some updates that go through on Insta. So you just search for Jimi Wollumbin, and I'm the only Jimi Wollumbin on Google. So all of the things that you will find there will lead you back to me. That's me.
Yeah, brilliant. And today, you know, our conversation was a little bit more philosophical and went in a lot of directions, but you give a lot of information on more micro stuff as well, around obviously the Chinese medicine herbs and viruses and microbes and all of those different things. So just so that people have got an idea and not just basing it on today's sort of macro style conversation, can you share some of the content topics that you do talk about in Patreon?
Yes,
so it gives people an idea.
Certainly. There's some of them that go big and macro, if you love that sort of stuff, that has traditional medicine and myth and things like that. But then there's others that are focused on, how to avoid long COVID, right? Herbs for inflammation and fatigue. Or at present, then there's been things, there's also just little clips of showing a new medicine that I've got, unpacking it like I've just picked off a tree, and they can see, oh, here's the medicine. Look, today we're looking at this. And you can see me with it in the garden, picking up some things or drying it out like that. So it goes very much from the level of how do I help my sore back or my fatigue or my hemorrhoids, and some practical tips at that level, through to those that are more on a medicine path, that want to dive deeply and need the skills and narratives and things from a traditional medicine perspective to be able to take them to a different way of practicing that goes beyond symptoms and leads ultimately to soul. Because one of the things that I tell people again and again is that health is not the absence of disease, but the roaring presence of soul. So the teaching must always lead us back to soul at some level.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, yeah, definitely everybody that's listening, at least jump on Jimi's Facebook page. And you've got a website as well, do you?
Yes, drjimi.com, DOCTORJIMI, drjimi.com.
Brilliant. So yeah, definitely jump on those places as a starting point, and then there'll be links on both those places to the Patreon if you want a little bit more. So I'd say definitely get some of Jimi in your life, because he's got a lot of valuable insights to share.
Thank you so much.
Oh, pleasure. So I'm just wondering, everyone who listened today, what your biggest insight or takeaway is from today's conversation. If you can let us know by leaving a comment wherever you've listened to this, whether it be on your favourite podcast app, or whether you've listened on YouTube or maybe through social media, if you can leave a comment, let us know, so that we might be able to have more conversations on some of those topics and share some more information as well. If you have listened to today's episode and enjoyed it, please do share it with your friends, and consider subscribing to the Wellthy Living podcast on iTunes and on YouTube. To find out a little bit more about my services, you can visit my website at Wellthy Living, so WELLTHY living.com.au, or connect with me through my social media channels. So until next time, remember, connection is medicine.